My name is Hallie Chen, and 3 years ago I lost $900,000 to the two people I trusted most in this world. I'm not talking about a bad investment or market crash. I'm talking about a calculated, methodical betrayal that destroyed my family, ruined my reputation, and nearly cost me my sanity. If you think you know your siblings, if you believe family loyalty is sacred, you need to hear this story, because what happened to me could happen to anyone, and the warning signs I missed might save you from losing everything. I'm 39 years old now, sitting in my modest Seattle apartment, finally able to tell this story without my hands shaking. But 3 years ago, I owned 6 successful restaurants, a waterfront mansion, and what I thought was an unbreakable bond with my little sister. Today, I'm starting over from scratch, wiser but broken, having learned the most painful lesson imaginable. Sometimes the people who know you best are the ones most capable of destroying you. This isn't just about money. This is about how my own sister spent 2 years studying my psychology, exploiting my deepest fears, and executing a con so sophisticated that I never saw it coming until it was too late to save myself. Let me start at the moment my world began to collapse, because you need to understand the stakes before you can appreciate how perfectly I was manipulated. It was March 8th, 2021, and I was in my flagship restaurant preparing for what should have been a busy Monday evening service when my phone started buzzing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Then came the text messages from friends and customers. Is it true about the investigation? Are you really involved in fraud? The news is saying terrible things about you. I had no idea what they were talking about until I opened my laptop and saw my photo plastered across every local news website. Seattle restaurateur under federal investigation for vacation rental scam. The article claimed that my Bellevue waterfront property had been used as headquarters for an elaborate Airbnb fraud ring that had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from unsuspecting guests. According to investigators, fake listings had been created, deposits had been collected for non-existent reservations, and victims had been left stranded with nowhere to stay. My hands were trembling as I called the detective mentioned in the article. Detective Morrison? This is Hallie Chen. I just saw the news story about my property, and I need to understand what's happening because I haven't been renting that house to anyone. There was a pause that felt like an eternity. Ms. Chen, we have extensive evidence showing your property has been operating multiple illegal rental schemes for over 2 years. We need you to come in immediately for questioning. That phone call changed everything, because what I discovered during that interrogation would prove that my sister Sophia and her husband Connor hadn't just been staying in my house temporarily like I thought. They had been running a criminal enterprise out of my property, using my name, my reputation, and my trust to defraud innocent people out of their vacation money. But that was just the beginning. What I learned next would show me that everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. Let me take you back to where this really started, 22 years ago, because understanding my past is crucial to understanding how I became the perfect victim. I was 17 years old when my parents died in a car accident on I-5 during a winter storm. They were driving home from their second jobs. My father from his night shift at a warehouse, my mother from cleaning offices, when a drunk driver hit them head-on. They died instantly, leaving me to raise my 3 younger siblings alone. Marcus was 15 and already showing signs of the behavioral problems that would plague him for years. Jake was 13, brilliant but traumatized by losing our parents so suddenly. And Sophia was just 9 years old, so devastated by the loss that she didn't speak for 4 months. I became their legal guardian while finishing high school and working 30 hours a week at a diner to keep us together. We lived in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in South Seattle, sleeping on mattresses on the floor and eating rice and beans most nights because that's all I could afford. But losing my parents taught me something that would shape every decision I made for the next 2 decades. I became obsessed with creating security for my family. Every choice was driven by the terror of ever being powerless again, of ever watching someone I loved suffer because I couldn't protect them. That drive led me to culinary school, where I discovered I had a talent for creating flavors that told stories about cultural heritage and family traditions. By 25, I was working as sous chef at one of Seattle's most respected restaurants. By 28, I had saved enough to open my first place. Hallie's Kitchen started as a 26-seat restaurant in the International District, serving Korean comfort food with modern techniques. The concept was simple: traditional recipes that reminded people of home, executed with professional precision that elevated familiar flavors into something special. The first 2 years were brutal. I worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week, sleeping in the restaurant's office to save on rent. But slowly, word spread. Food critics started writing reviews that used words like authentic and transformative. Local food bloggers began featuring us in their hidden gems lists. The breakthrough came when renowned chef Tom Douglas featured my kimchi fried rice on his Instagram with the caption, "This is what Seattle tastes like. Immigrant stories told through perfect technique." Hallie Chen is cooking the future of American cuisine. Within 6 months, we had a month-long waiting list. Within 3 years, I had opened 4 more locations. By 35, I owned 6 restaurants and a catering company that served everyone from tech startups to major corporations. My annual revenue exceeded $2.8 million. Success felt incredible, but it also came with unexpected pressure from my siblings, who had grown accustomed to my financial support over the years. Marcus had developed a serious drug addiction that cost him job after job. Every few months brought a new crisis requiring money: overdose hospital bills, legal fees, rehab programs that never seemed to work. I always paid because I remembered the scared 15-year-old who had lost his parents and needed his big sister to save him. Jake had become a successful software engineer but had expensive tastes that exceeded his income. When he wanted to start his own tech company but couldn't secure traditional funding, I invested $85,000 without hesitation. Family comes first, and Jake was brilliant enough to make it work. But Sophia was different. Sophia had grown from a traumatized 9-year-old into a woman who possessed an almost supernatural ability to make people want to help her. She was beautiful in an ethereal way that made strangers offer assistance, but more importantly, she had learned to weaponize vulnerability. After high school, Sophia drifted through college for 5 years, changing majors constantly while I paid for each new direction. When she finally graduated with a psychology degree, she moved to Portland to work at a wellness center, though she never seemed to hold any job for more than 6 months. Every few weeks brought a new financial emergency that required immediate help: car repairs, medical bills, security deposits for apartments she would abandon after a few months. I always said yes, because Sophia had a way of making you feel like refusing her was essentially abandoning her, the way fate had abandoned our family. Then, in August 2019, everything changed. Sophia called me with genuine excitement for the first time in years. "Hallie, I met someone amazing. His name is Connor Blake, and he's completely different from anyone I've ever been with. He's successful, he's stable, and for the first time in my life, I feel like someone actually wants to take care of me." Connor Blake was 31 years old, tall and handsome with the kind of polished confidence that suggested good education and family money. He claimed to own a high-end event planning company called Prestige Events that specialized in luxury weddings and corporate retreats for wealthy clients. His social media presence looked impressive: photos from exclusive venues, testimonials from satisfied customers, a lifestyle that appeared genuinely prosperous. When Sophia sent me pictures of them together at wine tastings and charity events, I felt relief that she had finally found someone who could provide the stability she'd been searching for. The first time I met Connor was at my house for Thanksgiving dinner in November 2019. He arrived with expensive wine and flowers, perfectly dressed, and immediately impressed everyone with stories about organizing events for tech executives and entertainment industry clients. "The key to my business," he explained while helping me in the kitchen, "is understanding that successful people value exclusivity above everything else. They want experiences that feel private and special, away from crowds and social media attention." It made perfect sense. Connor seemed knowledgeable about event planning, had professional business cards and a polished website, and most importantly, Sophia seemed happier than I had seen her since our parents died. She was glowing, confident, talking about their future with enthusiasm that had been missing from her life for years. Within 6 months, they were engaged. The wedding was planned for September 2020, and Connor insisted on handling all the arrangements himself. "I want to show your family what I can do," he said. "This is my chance to prove I can take care of Sophia the way she deserves." But then, COVID-19 changed everything. In March 2020, as restaurants across the country shut down and my business faced potential bankruptcy, Connor called me with what sounded like genuine desperation. "Hallie, I hate to ask this, especially knowing how hard things are for you right now, but my business has been completely destroyed by the pandemic. Every event for the next 6 months has been canceled, and I'm about to lose everything I've built." He paused, and I could hear real fear in his voice. "Sophia doesn't know how bad things are because I don't want to scare her, but we're going to lose our apartment. I know this is huge to ask, but do you have any property where we could stay temporarily? Just until the economy recovers and I can rebuild my client base." The timing was terrible. My restaurants were barely surviving on takeout orders, and I was burning through savings to keep my staff employed. But Connor had proven himself to be responsible and hardworking, and Sophia was my baby sister who had already lost too much in her life. "Actually," I said, "I bought an investment property in Bellevue last year that I was planning to use as a short-term rental. It's sitting empty right now because of the pandemic restrictions. You and Sophia could stay there while you get back on your feet." "Hallie, that would save our lives. What would you want for rent?" "Nothing," I said. "You're family now. Just cover the utilities and keep the place in good condition. Consider it my investment in your recovery." The relief in his voice was overwhelming. "I can't express what this means to us. Sophia is going to cry when I tell her. You're literally saving our future." We agreed they would move in by April 1st and stay for 6 months maximum, long enough for Connor to rebuild his business and find stable income. It seemed like the perfect solution for everyone. The following weekend, I drove to Bellevue to show them the property I had purchased for $650,000 the previous fall. It was a beautiful 4-bedroom house with Lake Washington views, a gourmet kitchen, and enough space for Connor to set up a home office where he could restart his business. Sophia cried when she saw it. She walked through the rooms touching everything like she couldn't believe it was real, looking out at the water with an expression of pure gratitude. "Hallie," she said, hugging me tight, "I don't know how we'll ever repay you for this kindness." "You don't need to repay me," I said. "You just need to be happy and get back on your feet. That's all I've ever wanted for you." Connor was equally grateful, though I noticed he seemed to be mentally cataloging everything valuable in the house: the artwork, the furniture, the high-end appliances. At the time, I assumed he was just appreciating the quality of the space. Later, I would realize he was conducting an inventory for purposes I couldn't have imagined. 6 months, I said as I handed over the keys. That should be plenty of time to rebuild your business and find your own place. Absolutely, Connor said, shaking my hand firmly. 6 months maximum. You have my word. For the first few months, everything seemed perfect. Sophia sent regular updates with photos of them cooking in my kitchen, working in the garden, and enjoying the peaceful lake views. They seemed genuinely grateful and responsible, treating my house with obvious care and respect. In July, they invited me over for a barbecue to celebrate their first wedding anniversary. It was a lovely evening. Connor grilled salmon while Sophia made salad with herbs from the garden they had planted. We sat on the deck watching the sunset over the lake, and I felt genuine happiness that my sister had found such a good partner. We've been looking at apartments in Seattle, Connor told me that night. There are some nice places in Capitol Hill that might work once my business gets fully back on track. That's wonderful, I said. I'm so glad things are working out for you both. We should be out of here by October, maybe November at the latest. Sophia added. We just want to make sure we find the right place rather than rushing into something. But October came and went without any updates about apartment hunting. When I asked about their timeline in November, Sophia's responses became vague. The rental market is really competitive right now. We're still looking at options. November became December. December became January. Every conversation about their moving plans was met with new delays and excuses. They needed more time to save money. Connor's business was taking longer to recover than expected. They wanted to wait until after the holidays to start apartment hunting seriously. Meanwhile, I started noticing changes during my monthly visits. Small things at first. Furniture rearranged, some of my decorative items missing, new pieces that I didn't recognize, mixed in with my belongings. We just moved some things around to make it feel more comfortable, Sophia explained when I asked. And we had to store some of our belongings somewhere. You don't mind, do you? By February 2021, they had been in my house for 10 months, instead of the agreed-upon 6. When I finally insisted on a firm move-out date, the conversation became tense. Hallie, you need to understand something, Connor said, his usual charm replaced by something harder. We're not just living here rent-free. We've been maintaining your property, making improvements, adding value. Do you have any idea what you'd pay a property management company for what we've been doing? We've actually been meaning to discuss compensation with you, Sophia added. Some of the improvements we've made are pretty significant investments in your property. That's when I realized something was very wrong. But I had no idea how wrong until Detective Morrison showed me the evidence they had collected. What I discovered next would prove that Connor Blake wasn't an event planner whose business had been hurt by the pandemic. He was a professional con artist with a criminal record spanning 3 states. And my sister Sophia wasn't his innocent victim. She was his partner, his co-conspirator, and the mastermind behind a scheme that had been planned from the moment they met me. By the time I learned the truth, they had already stolen almost everything I had worked 20 years to build. Sitting in Detective Morrison's sterile interrogation room on March 9th, 2021, I believed I was there to clear up a simple misunderstanding. I had no idea I was about to discover that my own sister had orchestrated the most sophisticated betrayal I could never have imagined. Ms. Chen, Detective Morrison said, sliding a thick manila folder across the metal table. I need you to look at these documents and tell me if you recognize any of them. I opened the folder with steady hands, though my heart was racing. The first page made my stomach drop. It was a business registration form for something called Lakeside Luxury Rentals, filed in February 2020, just 1 month before Connor had called me claiming his business was failing. The registered address was my Bellevue property. The authorized operators were listed as Connor Blake and S. Chen. I never signed this, I whispered, staring at what looked like my signature but felt foreign under my fingertips. I never authorized anyone to run a business out of my house. Keep looking, Detective Morrison said, his voice gentle but firm. The next documents were even worse. Bank statements showing deposits totaling over $200,000 into an account I'd never seen. Screenshots of Airbnb listings for my property with professional photos I didn't recognize, and descriptions calling it Seattle's most exclusive waterfront retreat. Guest reviews praising the amazing hosts Connor and Sophie and their luxury hospitality experience. But what destroyed me completely was a printed email exchange between Connor and someone identified as Michael Reeves, business partner, dated February 2020. Just 1 month before Connor's desperate phone call to me. The mark is perfect, Connor had written. S's sister owns multiple restaurants and a waterfront property. Total net worth probably over $1 million. Best part is, she has this savior complex from raising S after their parents died. She needs to feel needed, which makes her incredibly easy to manipulate. Below, the response from Reeves was equally chilling. Perfect. S has been building this setup for over 2 years now. The key is making her think it's temporary help for family. Once we're in the house, we can run operations for years before she figures it out. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My vision started to blur as the reality hit me. Who is this Michael Reeves? I managed to ask through the tightness in my chest. Detective Morrison leaned forward, his expression grim. Reeves is Connor's longtime partner in vacation rental scams across the Pacific Northwest. We've been tracking their operation for 18 months. They've been working together for over 3 years, targeting property owners through elaborate family emergency stories. But here's what makes this case different. They usually target strangers. Your sister brought them inside information about a family member, which made their con exponentially more sophisticated. He paused, letting that sink in. According to our investigation, your sister contacted Reeves first, proposing you as a target. She provided detailed information about your finances, your psychology, and most importantly, your emotional vulnerabilities. He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. 3 months ago, one of their victims, a tech executive who became suspicious when his luxury rental turned out to be occupied by other guests, hired a private investigator. The PI posed as a cable technician responding to a fake service call and managed to install hidden recording equipment in your main living areas. The video he showed me was time-stamped 3 weeks earlier. It showed my sister and Connor in what I immediately recognized as my living room, but they weren't the grateful, struggling couple I believed I was helping. They were relaxed, drinking wine from my glasses and discussing their operation with casual confidence. The beautiful thing about this setup, she was saying, gesturing with a wine glass, is that Hallie will never get suspicious because she thinks she's saving us. She's so desperate to keep the family together that she'll believe any story we tell her. Connor nodded, his feet casually propped up on my coffee table. Your sister is textbook psychology, classic eldest child syndrome combined with survivor's guilt from losing your parents. She literally can't say no to family in crisis. I had to pause the video. My head was spinning, and I felt nauseated. The person I had raised from childhood, the person I had sacrificed everything to protect, was sitting in my house analyzing my psychological weaknesses like I was nothing more than a case study. There's more, Detective Morrison said quietly, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine sympathy. He clicked to another segment. This one showed my sister alone, talking on the phone to someone I couldn't see. Trust me, she has no idea, she was saying, actually laughing. We've been running weekend rentals for months, and she thinks we're just staying here temporarily while Connor rebuilds his event planning business. She's so busy being the successful big sister who saves everyone that she doesn't pay attention to details. The person on the other end said something, and Sophia responded. Connor's fake business story was perfect. She actually believed he lost clients because of COVID. She has no idea he's never had a legitimate business in his life. That's when I completely broke down. The weight of the betrayal hit me like a physical blow, and I couldn't control the sobs that racked my body. Detective Morrison handed me tissues and sat quietly, allowing me to process the magnitude of what I'd just learned. For several long minutes, I cried for the sister I thought I knew, for the family I believed we had, and for my own naivety in trusting someone who had been systematically planning my destruction. When the tears finally subsided, I felt hollow, like something essential had been carved out of me. Take your time, Detective Morrison said gently. I understand this is overwhelming. When you're ready, there's more you need to know about the scope of their operation. I wiped my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. I'm sorry. This is just... I never imagined my own sister could... You have nothing to apologize for, he said firmly. You're the victim of an extremely sophisticated psychological manipulation. What they did to you required years of planning and a deep understanding of your personal history and emotional triggers. After another few minutes, when I had composed myself enough to continue, Detective Morrison opened another section of his files. Over the next 2 hours, I'm going to walk you through all the evidence we've collected. I want you to understand exactly how they operated and why this case is unlike anything we've seen before. Connor and Sophia hadn't just been running occasional weekend rentals. They had created multiple fake listings using my property, sometimes double booking dates and keeping deposits when victims showed up to find the house already occupied. They had forged documents in my name, including business licenses and insurance claims for damage that never occurred. They had also used my property and credit rating to secure business loans that went directly into their personal accounts. The total amount they had stolen was staggering: $400,000 in rental income, $60,000 in fraudulent insurance payouts, and $90,000 in business credit obtained using my property as collateral, over $550,000 total. But the sophisticated part, Detective Morrison explained, was how they used your reputation to legitimize their operation. They marketed the rental as owned by award-winning Seattle restaurateur Hallie Chen, using your business success to justify premium pricing and convince victims they were dealing with established professionals. My own achievements had been weaponized against innocent families who trusted my name and reputation. People had been scammed out of their vacation money because they believed they were renting from a successful businesswoman, not from career criminals. What happens now? I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. We're building a federal case for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. But Ms. Chen, I need you to understand something, even though you're clearly the victim here. This investigation is going to severely damage your reputation. When this becomes public, some people will assume you were either involved or negligently irresponsible. He was absolutely right. Within hours of the story breaking on local news, my restaurants were flooded with cancellation calls. Corporate catering clients terminated contracts immediately. Food bloggers who had once celebrated my work were writing articles questioning my business judgment and wondering how I could have been so blind to what was happening. The social media reaction was brutal. Thousands of comments from people who assumed I must have known something. How could she not know her own sister was running scams out of her house? Successful businesswoman conveniently claims ignorance about massive fraud. Another rich person trying to dodge responsibility. I hired criminal defense attorney David Richardson, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I needed protection from being charged as an accomplice. The retainer alone cost me $40,000, money I was rapidly running out of as my business collapsed around me. Within 2 weeks, my insurance company suspended my coverage pending investigation of potential fraud. Without insurance, I couldn't legally operate my restaurants, which meant I had to close 4 of my 6 locations immediately. The remaining 2 were hemorrhaging money as customers stayed away, terrified by the constant negative media coverage. My staff, many of whom had worked for me for years, were forced to find other jobs because I couldn't guarantee their paychecks. Suppliers demanded payment up front instead of extending the credit terms we'd maintained for years. My landlords began eviction proceedings on properties where I could no longer afford rent. By May 2021, I was losing over $30,000 a month just trying to keep my remaining businesses alive. By June, I had sold my last 2 restaurants at devastating losses just to pay legal fees and avoid bankruptcy. The emotional toll was even worse than the financial devastation. Friends stopped calling because they didn't know what to believe about my involvement. Business associates distanced themselves to protect their own reputations. Even Marcus and Jake seemed suspicious, asking careful questions about what I really knew about Sophia's activities. The isolation was crushing. I would go days without speaking to anyone except my attorney and his staff. I developed insomnia so severe that I was sleeping maybe 2 hours a night, lying awake replaying every conversation I'd had with Sophia, looking for clues I should have caught. The good news, David told me during one of our weekly meetings in July, is that the surveillance evidence clearly proves you were deceived. The recordings show Sophia and Connor actively planning to manipulate you. What's the bad news? The bad news is that proving your innocence won't restore your reputation or recover your money. Even if they're convicted and ordered to pay restitution, you'll be lucky to get back 20% of what they stole. Meanwhile, Sophia and Connor had vanished. The day after the investigation became public, they had cleaned out my house and disappeared, leaving behind only furniture too heavy to move quickly. Police found evidence that they had been planning their escape for months, with new identities already established and money transferred to offshore accounts. 7 weeks later, they were arrested at a luxury resort in Belize. The arrest required coordination between FBI, Interpol, and Belize authorities, making international headlines. Sister con artists captured in international fraud scheme, and restaurant empire destroyed by family betrayal. The photos of Sophia being led away in handcuffs broke my heart despite everything she had done. She looked so small and scared. Nothing like the confident woman I'd seen laughing about manipulating me in those surveillance videos. But any sympathy I felt evaporated when I learned what she told federal investigators during her interrogation. According to Detective Morrison, Sophia claimed that I had been aware of their rental operation from the beginning and had been receiving a percentage of the profits through shell companies. She said I had specifically purchased the Bellevue property for the purpose of running vacation rental scams, and that I was only pretending to be a victim to avoid prosecution. She's trying to implicate you to reduce her own sentence, David warned me. It's a common strategy when criminals get caught. They try to drag innocent people down with them. But the surveillance videos prove I didn't know anything, I protested. The videos help significantly, but they don't cover every interaction you had with your sister over 2 years. A prosecutor, could theoretically argue that you discussed the operation during conversations that weren't recorded. For months, I lived in terror of being charged as an accomplice. Every phone call from David made my heart race. Every news article about the case mentioned my name as a person of interest in the investigation. The stress was destroying my health. I lost 25 pounds over 7 months. developed anxiety attacks that sent me to the emergency room twice, and started having nightmares about being arrested. My doctor prescribed medication and recommended therapy, but I couldn't afford either because every dollar I had was going to legal fees. By October 2021, I had been forced to sell my house to pay debts. The woman who had once owned 6 successful restaurants was living in a studio apartment and working night shifts at a diner, trying to rebuild my life from nothing. Then, in November, Detective Morrison called with news that would change everything I thought I understood about my own family. Ms. Chen, we need to meet in person. We've discovered something about your sister's background that you need to know. When I arrived at the police station, Detective Morrison's expression was grimmer than I had ever seen it. We've been investigating your sister's history more deeply, he said, opening a thick new file. What we found explains a lot about how this operation was planned, but it's going to be very difficult for you to hear. The documents he showed me revealed that Sophia had been running cons since she was 19 years old. Credit card fraud targeting elderly victims. Online dating scams where she would romance lonely men and convince them to send money for fake emergencies. Even a fake charity operation that claimed to help homeless veterans. Your sister isn't someone who got corrupted by Connor, Detective Morrison said quietly. She's been a career criminal for over a decade. Based on our investigation, we believe she actually recruited Connor specifically to help her target you. I felt like the floor was disappearing beneath me. You're saying she planned this from the beginning? We found detailed notes in her handwriting, dating back over 2 years, analyzing your financial situation, your business operations, and most disturbingly, your psychological profile. She had researched your childhood trauma, your relationships with your siblings, and specifically how your parents' death made you vulnerable to manipulation. He showed me photocopies of documents written in Sophia's familiar handwriting, pages and pages of observations about my personality, my fears, my financial resources, and my desperate need to keep our family together. She had studied me like a predator studies prey. One page, titled H Project, contained a timeline stretching back 3 years. It showed that Sophia had been planning to con me since long before she even met Connor, and that everything from their romance to their marriage to their financial crisis had been carefully orchestrated to gain access to my property and resources. The most devastating document was a psychological analysis she had written about me. Subject demonstrates classic eldest child syndrome compounded by survivor guilt from parental death. Primary motivation is maintaining family unity at any cost. Will sacrifice personal well-being to help siblings. Key vulnerability. Cannot distinguish between genuine need and manipulation when family is involved. My own sister had psychologically dissected me to figure out how to destroy my life. Sophia didn't just betray you, Detective Morrison said gently. She spent years studying you, identifying your weaknesses, and planning how to exploit them. This wasn't opportunistic crime. This was a targeted, long-term psychological operation designed specifically to extract maximum value from your relationship. As I sat there reading my sister's clinical analysis of how to manipulate me, I realized that the person I thought I had raised and loved had never existed at all. The vulnerable, struggling Sophia I had spent decades trying to protect was just a character she performed to maintain my trust while systematically planning my destruction. But what Detective Morrison told me next would prove that even this devastating revelation was only the beginning of what my sister had done to me. What Detective Morrison told me next would complete the picture of just how thoroughly my sister had been planning my destruction. But thankfully, it wouldn't shatter my understanding of reality itself. Ms. Chen, he said, opening one final thick folder. We've discovered that your sister's criminal activities extend far beyond the rental fraud. What I'm about to show you reveals the true scope of her long-term planning. The first document made my stomach drop. It was a credit report in my name, showing loans and credit cards I had never applied for, totaling over $150,000 in unauthorized debt. The accounts had been opened gradually over the past 3 years, each one using slightly different variations of my personal information. Your sister has been systematically stealing your identity since shortly after she moved in with Connor, Detective Morrison explained. She used your business credentials and property ownership to qualify for credit lines that she never intended to pay back. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements showing cash advances taken from credit cards opened in my name. Loan applications using my social security number and business information to secure unsecured personal loans. Even a business line of credit opened using my restaurant's tax identification number. But this is just the financial component. Detective Morrison continued. We've also found evidence that she's been conducting similar operations against other targets, including attempts to defraud your brother Jake. He showed me email exchanges between Sophia and Connor from 8 months earlier, discussing plans to convince Jake to invest his startup funding in a fake cryptocurrency venture they had created. The emails revealed that Sophia had been pumping Jake for information about his business finances during family conversations, building a profile of his assets and investment habits. Your brother actually contacted our fraud division 6 months ago. Detective Morrison revealed he became suspicious when Sophia kept asking detailed questions about his business accounts and tried to pressure him into making urgent investment decisions. His report was part of what led us to investigate your sister's activities more thoroughly. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. Jake had tried to warn me, and I hadn't listened. I remembered several conversations where he had seemed concerned about Sophia's behavior, asking careful questions about my arrangement with her and whether I was keeping track of my finances. I had dismissed his concerns as sibling jealousy, never imagining that he was trying to protect me from a predator I couldn't see. We've also discovered that your sister has been running romance scams online, using fake profiles to defraud lonely men out of thousands of dollars. Detective Morrison continued. She's been operating multiple dating profiles with stolen photos, creating elaborate sob stories to extract money from victims across the country. The scope of her criminal enterprise was staggering. While living in my house rent-free and presenting herself as a struggling wife trying to rebuild her life. Sophia had been running a multifaceted fraud operation that generated income from dozens of different sources. The most disturbing thing we found, Detective Morrison said, was this. He opened his laptop and showed me a document that made my blood freeze. It was a detailed psychological profile that Sophia had written about me, analyzing my personality, my fears, my financial situation, and most importantly, my emotional vulnerabilities. The document was titled Target Analysis HOC, and it read like a predator's playbook for emotional manipulation. Subject demonstrates classic eldest child syndrome compounded by survivor guilt from parental death. She had written, primary psychological drivers need to maintain family unity, compulsion to rescue struggling family members, inability to distinguish between genuine need and manipulation when family is involved. Exploitation strategy, present as vulnerable family member in crisis requiring temporary assistance. Subject's trauma history makes her incapable of refusing help to family in emergency situations. Key vulnerability. Subject will sacrifice personal well-being indefinitely to avoid feeling responsible for family members' failure. Long-term objective, extract maximum financial value through property access, credit fraud, and business credential theft. Timeline, 2 to 3 years before subject becomes suspicious. Exit strategy, disappear with assets before detection, leaving subject with debt and damaged credit. Reading my sister's clinical analysis of how to destroy me was like being dissected while still alive. She had studied me like a scientist studies a laboratory subject, identifying every weakness and planning exactly how to exploit each vulnerability. Your sister wrote this analysis 2 months before Connor called you claiming they needed help. Detective Morrison said quietly, "Everything that happened to you was planned in advance. The timing of their crisis, Connor's specific story about his business failing, even the emotional manipulation during your family dinner, it was all scripted." He showed me more documents from Sophia's files, practice scripts for different emotional scenarios, backup plans in case I became suspicious, even contingency strategies for manipulating other family members if I stopped being useful. One document particularly stood out, a timeline showing that Sophia had been researching my property purchase and business finances for over a year before they moved in. She had known exactly how much my house was worth, what my restaurant revenues were, and how much credit I could access, long before she called crying about being evicted. The fake eviction story was completely manufactured, Detective Morrison explained. We contacted their previous landlord. They were never behind on rent. They gave notice and moved out voluntarily, specifically to execute this con against you. Every detail of their sob story had been a lie. The desperate phone call, the tears, the claims about sleeping in Connor's car. All of it had been performance designed to trigger my psychological need to rescue family members. What happens now? I asked, feeling emotionally exhausted by the scope of the betrayal. We have enough evidence to convict both of them on multiple federal charges, Detective Morrison said. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and racketeering. Your sister is looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison, and Connor will likely get 12 to 15 years. He paused. But I need to prepare you for what's coming next. Sophia's defense strategy is going to focus on portraying her as a victim of Connor's manipulation. She's going to claim that he coerced her into targeting you, and that she was just as much a victim as you were. Do you think a jury will believe that? Not with the evidence we have. Her psychological analysis of you and her planning documents prove that she was the mastermind, not Connor. But she's going to try to manipulate you one final time. She'll probably attempt to contact you directly, claiming remorse and asking for your forgiveness or help. Detective Morrison was right. 3 days later, I received a letter from Sophia while she was in federal custody awaiting trial. Just seeing her handwriting on the envelope made me feel physically sick. But I knew I needed to read it to understand her final manipulation attempt. Dearest Hallie, the letter began. I know you must be angry with me right now, and I understand why. But I need you to know that everything I did was because Connor threatened me. I was so scared of what he might do to our family that I felt like I had no choice but to go along with his plans. The letter was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, carefully crafted to exploit every psychological trigger she knew I possessed. She claimed that Connor had threatened to hurt me if she didn't cooperate with his schemes. She insisted that she had been trying to protect me by gathering evidence against him while pretending to participate in his plans. I know I made terrible mistakes, she wrote, but everything I did was because I love you and wanted to protect our family. I was planning to expose Connor's operation and return everything to you, but the police arrested us before I could make things right. Even knowing what I knew about her true nature, I could feel the emotional pull of her words. She was using the same psychological techniques that had worked on me for decades, presenting herself as my protector, making me feel guilty for not saving her, positioning herself as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. But I had learned something crucial from Detective Morrison's investigation. The documents proved that she had been the mastermind, not Connor. Her detailed planning and psychological analysis showed that she was a predator who had been calculating my destruction for years. I wrote one brief response. "I've seen your planning documents. I know exactly what you are. Do not contact me again." The trial began 8 months later, and it lasted 3 weeks. Sophia's defense team did exactly what Detective Morrison had predicted, trying to portray her as a victim of Connor's manipulation and coercion. They brought in character witnesses who testified about her apparent kindness and vulnerability. They hired psychologists who argued that she suffered from battered woman syndrome and had been psychologically controlled by Connor. But the prosecution had her planning documents. When they presented her detailed psychological analysis of me to the jury, the courtroom fell completely silent. When they showed her timeline documenting years of research into my finances and property, several jurors looked visibly disturbed. The evidence was overwhelming. Her own words prove that she had been the architect of the conspiracy, not its victim. The jury convicted her on all charges: wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and racketeering. She was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Connor received 15 years for his role in the conspiracy, and Michael Reeves was sentenced to 12 years for his participation in their broader fraud network. As I watched Sophia being led away in handcuffs after the sentencing, she turned to look at me one final time, instead of the tears or remorse I might have expected. Her expression was cold and calculating. For just a moment, the mask slipped completely, and I saw the predator who had been hiding behind the performance of sisterhood my entire adult life. That was the last time I saw the person I had thought was my sister. Recovery has been the most challenging thing I've ever attempted, but also the most important. The financial losses were devastating. I lost my house, my restaurants, and most of my savings. But the psychological damage went deeper than anything money could measure. Learning that someone you loved and trusted had been systematically planning your destruction changes something fundamental about how you see relationships. For months, I questioned every interaction I'd ever had, wondering if other people were also manipulating me for hidden agendas. I spent 2 years in intensive therapy with specialists who work with victims of long-term psychological manipulation. I learned about trauma bonding, gaslighting, and how predators identify and exploit their victims' vulnerabilities. Most importantly, I learned that none of what happened to me was my fault. Loving your family, wanting to help people in crisis, trusting the people closest to you. These aren't character flaws. They're normal human responses that manipulative people learn to exploit. The problem wasn't that I was too trusting. The problem was that my sister was a predator who weaponized my love against me. I started over completely. I moved to Portland, Oregon, where nobody knew my story, and took a job as a line cook at a small neighborhood restaurant. It was humbling, working for someone else after owning my own business empire. But it was also healing. For the first time in decades, I was cooking because I loved it, not because I was trying to prove anything or support anyone else. I was working with people who knew nothing about my past and liked me for who I was in the present, rather than what I could provide for them. Slowly, carefully, I began building new relationships. I made friends who had no connection to my previous life, people who valued genuine connection over financial benefit. I learned to trust again, gradually and with appropriate boundaries, starting with small connections and building toward deeper relationships. 3 years after the trial, I was ready to take the next step. I opened a small cafe in Portland called Second Chances. It's nothing like the empire I once owned, just 14 tables and a simple menu of comfort food made with care and attention. But it's mine, built on honest relationships and authentic connections rather than manipulation and exploitation. The cafe has become more than just a business. It's become a community hub for people who are rebuilding their lives after various forms of trauma. We host support groups for fraud victims, serve as a safe space for people escaping toxic relationships, and offer employment opportunities for people who need a fresh start. I've also become an advocate for victims of family financial fraud, speaking at conferences and working with law enforcement agencies to help people recognize the warning signs of long-term manipulation. My story has helped dozens of other victims understand that they weren't responsible for being exploited by people they trusted. The most important lesson I've learned is this: real family isn't about blood relations or obligation. Real family is about mutual respect, genuine care, and people who support your well-being rather than exploit your vulnerabilities for their own benefit. I have a new family now, friends who have become chosen siblings, a community of survivors who understand the journey of rebuilding after betrayal, employees who have become trusted partners, and customers who have become genuine friends rather than sources of income. My biological sister nearly destroyed me, but in losing her, I discovered something more valuable: the strength to build authentic relationships based on truth, respect, and mutual support rather than manipulation and exploitation. If you're reading this and recognizing patterns in your own life, please know that you deserve better. You deserve relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not exploited for what you can provide. And if you're being manipulated by someone you trust, please remember, cutting toxic people out of your life isn't cruel or selfish. It's survival. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who see your love as a weakness to exploit, rather than a gift to cherish. My sister stole years of my life and hundreds of thousands of dollars, but she couldn't steal my future. I'm 41 years old now, and I'm finally free to build the life I actually want, rather than the life she manipulated me into creating for her benefit. That freedom, the freedom to trust appropriately, to love without fear, to build authentic relationships, and to help others heal from similar betrayals, is worth more than all the money she stole, more than the business empire she destroyed, more than the false family connections she shattered with her lies. I am finally, truly free to be myself, rather than the victim she needed me to be. And that freedom is everything. If my story helps even one person recognize manipulation before it destroys their life, then everything I went through will have served a purpose beyond my own healing. We can't always prevent betrayal, but we can learn to recognize it, survive it, and ultimately use our experience to help others avoid the same traps. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's building a life so authentic and fulfilling that the person who tried to destroy you becomes irrelevant to your happiness. I've built that life, and it's more beautiful than anything I lost.